My name is Alyssa Monroe. I'm 18 years old. On the night of my 18th birthday, my parents handed me a stack of legal papers in front of my entire family and told me to sign them. My mother smiled and said, "It's just for your future, sweetheart." Everyone was watching me. My father standing behind my chair, my aunt and uncle sitting across the table. Even my cousin holding his phone like this was something worth remembering. I picked up the papers, started reading, and then I saw one line that didn't belong. One sentence that made my stomach drop. Before I could react, my older sister leaned down, close enough that no one else could hear her, and whispered something in my ear that changed everything. So instead of questioning them, instead of refusing, I smiled. I signed. And then I looked up at both of my parents and said one thing: "You might want to check the date on that." And just like that, their confidence disappeared. Before I continue, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every comment. My 18th birthday should have felt light, maybe even a little exciting. The kind of night where you finally feel like you're stepping into adulthood. But from the moment I walked into the dining room, something felt off. The table wasn't set for celebration. There were no decorations, no candles, no music playing in the background. Instead, everything looked unusually organized, too clean, too intentional. Right in the center of the table sat a neat stack of papers, perfectly aligned, with two pens placed carefully on top like they had been waiting for me. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway, watching me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My father didn't greet me the way he usually did. He didn't joke or ask how I felt turning 18. Instead, he simply said, "Sit down, Alyssa. We have something important to go over." And that's when I realized this wasn't a birthday dinner. This was something else entirely. As I sat down, I became aware of something that made the room feel even smaller than it already was. Everyone was watching me. My aunt had her hands folded on the table, her posture stiff, like she was waiting for a meeting to start. My uncle leaned back slightly, but his eyes stayed locked on me, studying my reactions like he already knew what was coming. Even my cousin, who normally couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes, was quiet, holding his phone loosely in his hand, not scrolling, not texting, just observing. It didn't feel like family. It felt like an audience, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. I glanced at my parents, hoping for something normal, a joke, a smile, anything that would make this feel like a celebration again. But they didn't look at me like it was my birthday. They looked at me like they were waiting for me to do something. My mother reached forward and gently slid the stack of papers toward me. Her voice was calm, almost reassuring. "It's just routine paperwork now that you're 18, she said. "Nothing complicated." My father nodded in agreement, crossing his arms like everything had already been explained, even though it hadn't. I placed my hands on the edge of the table but didn't touch the papers yet. Routine. That word didn't sit right with me. If it was routine, why was everyone here? Why did it feel like I was being watched instead of celebrated? I flipped the first page slowly, keeping my face neutral, careful not to show that something inside me had already started to tighten. Because whatever this was, it wasn't casual. The title at the top of the page immediately caught my attention. Property Transfer Authorization. I read it again, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. Property? What property? We had never talked about anything like that. Not openly, not clearly. My parents had always been vague whenever money or inheritance came up. "Things will be handled later," they would say. "Don't worry about it." But now, suddenly, on my birthday, I was supposed to sign something involving property? I kept reading, slower now, careful. Because whatever this was, it was already starting to feel bigger than they were pretending it was. What made it worse wasn't just the paper. It was the silence. No one was rushing me. No one was explaining anything further. And that, strangely, made it more suspicious. Because if they wanted me to understand, they would be talking. Instead, they were waiting, watching, letting me move at my own pace, but only on the surface. Underneath that silence, I could feel something else. Expectation. Like they believed I would do exactly what they wanted, without asking questions. That kind of confidence doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from thinking you're in control. And in that moment, they thought they were. I turned the page. Halfway down, buried between paragraphs that sounded formal and harmless, there was a sentence that didn't belong. The undersigned voluntarily relinquishes all future claims to inherited property and associated assets. I read it once, then again, slower the second time. Relinquishes all future claims. That wasn't routine. That wasn't protection. That was permanent. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look up. I didn't react. Because the moment I reacted, the moment I showed I understood, everything would change. So I stayed quiet and kept reading. I must have taken a little too long, because my father shifted behind me. "Alyssa, it's straightforward," he said. "You don't need to overthink it." My aunt leaned forward slightly. "We all go through this at some point," she added, her tone soft but firm. Then my uncle chuckled under his breath. "It's just paperwork. Sign it and enjoy your night." It wasn't what they said. It was how quickly they said it. Too fast. Too coordinated. Like they were trying to push me past something before I had time to fully understand it. That was the moment I knew for sure. This wasn't for me. This was for them. Just as I was about to say something, my older sister moved. She hadn't spoken the entire night. Not once. But now she stepped closer, placing one hand lightly on the back of my chair. She leaned down slowly, her face close to mine, her voice barely above a whisper so no one else could hear. And she said, "They think you don't know about Grandpa's trust." Everything inside me went completely still. I didn't move. I didn't look at her. But in that moment, everything shifted. Because suddenly, this wasn't confusing anymore. It made perfect sense. My grandfather had always been quiet about money, but I knew enough. Enough to understand that there was something set aside, something that wasn't controlled by my parents. And if this document made me give up my claim, then this wasn't about helping me. This was about cutting me out. Completely. And they were doing it in front of everyone, using pressure, expectation, and timing. They thought I didn't know. They thought I would sign without reading. They thought I was still the same version of me they could control. They were wrong. I leaned back slightly in my chair, picked up the pen, and for the first time that night, I smiled. Not because I trusted them, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood exactly what they were trying to do. And more importantly, I knew something they didn't. Something I had already taken care of weeks before this night ever happened. So I signed. Calm. Clean. No hesitation. Then I placed the pen down, looked directly at both of them, and said, "You might want to check the date on that." And just like that, their confidence cracked. The moment I said, "Check the date," the entire room shifted. It wasn't loud. No one reacted dramatically. But something changed in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. My father reached for the papers first. Not quickly, not aggressively, carefully. Like he already knew he might not like what he was about to see. My mother didn't move. She stayed completely still, her eyes locked on me, trying to read something in my face that I wasn't giving her. That was the difference now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. They were reacting to me. My father flipped to the last page. His eyes moved straight to the signature line, then just above it, where the date was written. and I watched it happen. That exact moment when understanding hit. His fingers tightened slightly on the paper. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But I saw it. Because I was watching him the same way they had been watching me all night. Carefully. Quietly. Waiting. My mother finally leaned forward. "What is it?" she asked. But she already knew something wasn't right. The date on that document wasn't from that night. It wasn't even from that week. It was from 3 weeks earlier. A legal timestamp that made the entire document irrelevant. Because anything signed that night couldn't override what had already been finalized before it. And they hadn't checked. They had prepared everything perfectly. The pressure, the timing, the audience. But they hadn't considered one possibility. That I had already moved first. My mother reached for the papers then. Faster than before. She flipped through them quickly, scanning, her movements losing that calm precision she always had. "This doesn't make sense," she said. But her voice had changed. It wasn't controlled anymore. It was tight. My father didn't respond. He just kept looking at the page like he was trying to find a way around it. But there wasn't one. Because dates don't bend. And neither do signed records. I glanced at my sister. She had stepped back again, like she had never moved in the first place. Like she hadn't just changed everything with one sentence. Her face was neutral, but her eyes met mine for a brief second. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. She had known. Not everything, but enough to realize what they were trying to do. And enough to warn me, quietly, carefully, without exposing herself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I just spoke calmly. "I reviewed everything before tonight," I said. The room went completely still again. Not the same silence as before. This one was heavier. Because now they understood something they hadn't expected. I wasn't confused. I wasn't unprepared. And I definitely wasn't signing anything blindly. My uncle shifted in his chair. My aunt looked down at the table. The confidence that had filled the room earlier started to disappear. Piece by piece. Because their certainty had been built on one assumption, that I didn't know what I was signing. And once that assumption broke, everything else started to fall with it. My father finally looked up at me, really looked at me, not like a child, not like someone he could guide or correct, but like someone he needed to understand. "What did you do?" he asked. Not angry, not loud, just controlled. But underneath that control, there was something else. Concern. Because he knew this wasn't random. This wasn't luck. This was intentional. I held his gaze for a moment before answering. Not rushing. Not explaining everything. Just enough. "I made sure I understood my options," I said, and left it there. My mother sat back slowly in her chair. For the first time that night, she looked uncertain. Not defeated. Not yet. But uncertain. And that was new. Because she was always certain. Always in control of every conversation, every narrative, every outcome. But control depends on information. And right now, I had information she didn't. What my parents didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier I had already met someone my grandfather trusted, someone who had been waiting for me to turn 18, and that meeting had changed everything, because the inheritance they were trying to take from me that night was never theirs to control in the first place. And sitting there, watching them try to piece it together, I realized something for the first time in my life. They hadn't lost control because of a mistake. They lost it. Because I finally stopped playing the role they built for me. 3 weeks before my 18th birthday, I sat in a quiet office across from a man I had only heard about growing up. My grandfather's lawyer, not the one my parents used, the one my grandfather trusted. The office was small, nothing impressive. but everything inside it felt deliberate, organized, controlled. The kind of place where nothing important ever happened by accident. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Not judging, not testing, just confirming something. "You came alone," he said, and I nodded, because I already understood something my parents didn't. This wasn't something they were supposed to know about. He opened a file. My name was on it. Not handwritten, typed. Prepared long before that day. "Your grandfather left specific instructions," he said. That was the moment everything started to shift. Because my grandfather hadn't just left money, he had left conditions. Not restrictions, protections. Carefully written clauses that only activated when I turned 18, and more importantly, only if I came forward myself. I asked the question I hadn't said out loud before. Why didn't he just give it to my parents? The lawyer didn't hesitate. Because he didn't trust them to give it to you. Simple, direct, no emotion, just truth. And something inside me settled. Because deep down, I had always felt it. That quiet imbalance in my family. The way decisions were made around me, but never for me. The documents in front of me weren't simple. This wasn't just money sitting in an account. It was structured, layered, protected through trusts and legal controls that couldn't be overridden easily. My parents couldn't access it. They couldn't transfer it. And most importantly, they couldn't convince me to give it away unless I chose to. Which is exactly what they were trying to do that night. Without realizing, it was already too late. Before I left that office, the lawyer said something that stayed with me. "They may try to get you to sign something quickly." He didn't say it dramatically, just calmly, like someone who had seen this happen before. "If that happens, don't react. Just observe." That advice changed everything. Because instead of walking into my birthday confused, I walked in watching, listening, waiting. I could have avoided that dinner. I could have said no, refused to go. But I didn't. Because I needed to see it, needed to understand exactly how far they were willing to go, and more importantly, how they would do it. People reveal their real intentions when they think they've already won, and that night, they were very confident. Sitting at that table, watching my parents struggle to process what was happening, I realized something important. They weren't confused about the paperwork. They were confused about me. Because for the first time, I wasn't following the pattern they expected. I wasn't questioning. I wasn't hesitating. I was calm. And calm is dangerous when someone expects control. My father finally straightened up in his chair. That familiar tone came back into his voice. Controlled. Authoritative. "We can fix this," he said. Not ask. Not discuss. Fix. Like it was still his situation to manage, like I was still part of the system he controlled. But something in his voice had changed. It wasn't certainty anymore. It was pressure. My mother didn't argue. She shifted. Completely. Her tone softened. Her expression changed. Concern. Warmth. The version of her that always came out when she needed something. "We're just trying to help you," she said. And for a second, if I didn't know what I knew, it might have worked. But timing matters. And now, I was seeing everything clearly. I leaned back slightly in my chair, not aggressively, not defensively, just steady. And I said one sentence. "I already have legal guidance." That was it. Nothing dramatic. No explanation. But the effect was immediate. Because those 4 words did something nothing else could. They removed their advantage. Completely. And in that moment, I saw it clearly for the first time. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad communication. This was a plan. And now that they knew I wasn't alone in it anymore, They had to decide something very quickly. Push harder. Or back off completely. After I said those 4 words, I already have legal guidance. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but sharply. Like something invisible had snapped. My father stopped speaking mid-sentence. My mother's expression froze halfway between concern and calculation. And for the first time that night, nobody knew what to say next. Because control had just changed hands. He leaned forward slowly, eyes locked on mine. "What kind of legal guidance?" he asked. Not curious, careful, measured, like he was trying to figure out how much I knew, without revealing how much he was worried. And that's when I understood something important. He wasn't panicking yet, but he was close. I didn't answer his question, not directly. I just looked at the papers again, then back at him. The kind that told me to read everything twice. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because now they knew. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't reacting. I was prepared. And preparation is something you can't manipulate easily. My sister shifted in her chair. She wasn't part of the plan originally. You could see it. She kept glancing between my parents, then at me. Then she leaned closer again and whispered, "You don't have to do this right now." That whisper wasn't for me. It was fear. Because she could feel it too. Something was going wrong. My father reached for the papers again. But this time, his movements weren't smooth. He flipped pages too quickly. Missed one. Went back. That tiny hesitation, that was the crack. Because people who are in control don't rush. And he just did. My mother tried again. But this time, there was urgency behind it. "Sweetheart, this is just paperwork for your future." Same words, different tone, and I noticed something new. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching my reaction, tracking it. Like she needed me to respond a certain way. That's when it became obvious. This wasn't casual. This was rehearsed. I picked up the document again, slowly, carefully, and I asked one simple question. "Why is this dated last week?" No emotion, no accusation, just clarity. And that question hit harder than anything else I had said. Because dates don't lie. Nobody answered. Not immediately. And that silence? That was louder than any explanation could have been. Because if there was a simple answer, they would have given it. Instead, they hesitated. And hesitation exposes intention. That's when it happened. Just a small shift in tone. But I caught it. "You're overthinking this," he said. Too quickly, too firmly. That wasn't reassurance. That was pressure. And pressure only comes out when control starts slipping. I placed the papers back on the table. Neatly. Exactly how they gave them to me. Then I looked at both of them. Calm, composed, unmovable. And I said, "I'm not signing anything tonight." No anger. No explanation. No argument. Just a decision. And in that moment, their entire plan stopped. Because what they didn't realize yet was that this wasn't the moment they lost. That had already happened. Days ago. After I said I wasn't signing, they both just stared at me. Because this wasn't how it was supposed to go. This night had been planned. Carefully. Predictably. I was supposed to hesitate. Ask questions. Look to them for guidance. And then, trust them. That was the entire strategy. Not force. Not pressure. Just control through familiarity. But what they didn't plan for was me walking in already aware. I picked up the top document one last time, and this time, I said it out loud. "This transfers decision-making authority, doesn't it?" Silence, but I didn't stop. financial control, account access, future asset management. I looked directly at my father. You weren't protecting my future. Pause. You were taking control of it. And just like that, everything that was hidden became visible. My mother shook her head immediately. Too fast, too emotional. That's not what this is. But she didn't finish the sentence. Because she couldn't. Because once something is exposed, you can't put it back. And for the first time that night, she wasn't in control of the narrative anymore. My father leaned forward again, lower voice, more controlled than before. But now, it felt forced. You don't understand how complicated these things are. That line, that exact line, I had heard it my whole life, whenever decisions were made for me, whenever information was kept from me, but not this time. Because this time, I already understood everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Not big, not dramatic, but enough. And I placed it on the table between us. I met with his lawyer 3 weeks ago. That sentence landed heavier than anything else, because now they understood. This wasn't reaction. This was preparation. I opened the folder, slowly, letting them see it. Original documents, verified copies, signatures that didn't match what they gave me. And I said, everything was already secured. Not raised, not emotional, just clear. Because the truth didn't need volume. That's when my father leaned back, completely, like something inside him had just dropped. Because he finally understood the situation. He hadn't just failed tonight, he had no control to begin with. Everything they were trying to redirect, everything they were trying to manage, was never in their hands. Not legally, not anymore. I stood up from the table, calm, steady, and I looked at both of them. Not angry, not emotional, just done. And I said, you should have just been honest. That was it. No speech, no shouting. Because sometimes, the simplest truth hurts the most. I walked out of that house that night, and something felt different. Not lighter, not relieved, just clear. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't part of their system anymore. No expectations, no control, no manipulation, just distance and silence. Years passed, slowly, quietly, and life moved forward. On my terms, the inheritance stayed protected, untouched by anyone who didn't deserve access to it. And my parents? We never had another conversation like that again, because after that night, they understood something they never expected to learn. Control only works until the moment it doesn't. And once it breaks, it never comes back the same. Sometimes, the biggest revenge isn't exposing people loudly. It's letting them realize they lost everything quietly.